Can you all hear me all right? There's a microphone buried in my hair somewhere, so I don't know if it's working. But, so I feel really fortunate to be lecturing to such a progressive group today. And I couldn't help noticing something really interesting from the back of the room earlier on, which is that you're also an extremely technophilic group, more so than I've seen in previous lectures. There's a lot of iPads and phones. And I'm going to ask you to do something unusual, but before we start, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like you to all get those devices out right now and go into your settings mode and choose airplane mode. And put airplane mode on or flight mode on. Thank you so much for doing this for me. I hope you understand by the end of the lecture. I know that being a very progressive group, you probably understand why I'm asking that from the beginning, but if you don't, I hope you'll have a much better idea by the end of the lecture. And on that note, and this for some people this is a bit like asking them to sever a limb, but if you can also just let those devices sit down in your bag or on the floor during the lecture, that would be great. So, as explained, my background is trauma medicine. But about 6 or 7 years ago now, I got really interested in the health effects of non-ionising radiation. And I'm here to talk to you. Being such a forward-thinking group, normally I spend the bulk of my lecture explaining the problem. And I'm really happy that today I can focus on practical solutions instead of spending the whole lecture talking about the problem. So we're going to race through the first few slides, outlining a bit of the background, but then the real substance of this talk is going to be practically how we can improve our health and protect our environment. These are some of the organisations that I work with. I'm the founder of a group called FIRE, which I'll speak a little bit more about at the end. Trustee for the Radiation Research Trust, and if anyone wants to contact me after the lecture, it's through that group that would be best. So we're going to briefly talk about human physiology, and then the change in our electromagnetic environment, a little bit about current safety guidelines, and the health outcomes of electromagnetic exposures, and then what I've designed and called the A2H's of electromagnetic health, and that's the practical solutions part of the lecture. So, life is electromagnetic. That is what makes us tick. Your brain sends communications through electrical neurons that are electromagnetic impulses, and they're in a shielded cable, shielded with myelin sheath. That's how your brain functions. Your heart also is electromagnetic. Every beat of your heart is a synchronized cellular activity that is the communication that takes place is electromagnetic, and we can see that outwardly in the form of the electrocardiogram. Your muscle also, that's a contraction, and you can see the action potential there that it creates electrically. So we have all of this evidence that we can see of the intrinsic electromagnetic nature of your body. But it's not just outward that it goes. We have two-way transmission antennas. So we evolved to cue into very subtle, tiny fields in our environment to help regulate our circadian rhythm, etc. And our DNA is a fractal antenna. We're actually very good conductors at every level, not just down at the level of our DNA, but your whole body is an excellent walking antenna. Unsurprisingly, we're not alone. So we share this electromagnetic life with all other life on the planet. But there are some particular species, these are the airborne ones, sea creatures, and land-dwelling animals as well as man, that have especially honed some of these senses. And earlier on, one of the lectures touched on cryptochromes, and there are iron-bound mineral particles called magnetite, and certain sense organs that have been developed to hone electromagnetic senses to advantage for things like navigation, migration, hunting, etc. And we have some of those cryptochromes and iron-bound magnetite particles in our central nervous system. Now, we did evolve in an electromagnetic field, and some people try to use that to allay concern about the rapid escalations that we've seen recently. But the field that we evolved in really bears no resemblance to the one that we've very recently created. We now see signal strengths commonly around us that can be up to a quintillion times higher. That's 10 to the 18. And what's interesting to me about that radiation is that along the x-axis there, we've got frequency. And along the y-axis, you're looking at signal strength. And in green, that's natural background radiation. Well, that's what was around sort of in the 20s, so mostly natural. And there's this big dip that you'll see in the sort of gigahertz range. That's where there wasn't very much in our environment, but that is the set of frequencies that we have particularly decided to use. So we filled in our environment with a set of frequencies that didn't really exist during our evolution. And we've done this really fast. In evolutionary terms, the blink of an eye, the beat of a heart, this has happened in less than half of my lifetime. So it's never seen one generation from cradle to grave. So the bit that I'm going to focus on in my talk is the longer wavelengths. We're looking at things like radio microwaves, as we commonly use in communication devices, and the extremely low frequencies that we see from power lines, for example, and in our household wiring at, in this country, 50 hertz. And common devices that use fields like this are things like Wi-Fi routers and computers, cell phones, of course, and walkabout landlines, cordless landlines, security systems, baby monitors, etc., and smart meters. Wireless smart meters, I'll qualify that. So safety guideline-wise, we don't really have any here in the UK. That's the simple truth. Because the ICNIRP guidelines that we are currently using were not designed to be safety guidelines in this capacity. Those were written to give us a cut-off point at which thermal effects occur. What that means is tissue heating, so the heating of cells, which we know is destructive to the cell. However, there are thousands of papers that show non-thermal effects orders of magnitude below that level. So don't take my word for it, but this is from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and talking about these guidelines, and you'll see in the last sentence there, therefore, the generalization by many that the guidelines protect human beings from harm by any or all mechanisms is not justified. And some countries have responded in a very sensible way to that information. They've dropped their safety thresholds orders of magnitude lower to be more biologically friendly. Actually, even those incredibly low ones are still being criticised as not being low enough, because we have papers that show effects below those as well. But here in the UK, these are the ones that we use, which are thermally based, so they're not protective for the non-thermal effects. And the evidence is tens of thousands of research papers. They're not 100% consistent, so not every paper will tell you that damage is being done. We wouldn't expect that that would be the case, because these are biological, non-linear systems. And we're still in the embryological stages of understanding the effect of these waves on biology. But the majority do demonstrate harm. Interestingly, it depends who funded the study also. So when you look at industry-funded literature, about 70% of that literature would tell you there's nothing, no cause for concern. But if you take that out of the equation, which of course we should look at unbiased independent literature, and luckily that is still the majority, then we would actually see conversely that 70% of papers do show cause from harm. And every system and all life is affected. So this is just some studies looking at various different wildlife and plants, etc. And you can see in blue there that impact is shown in the 70% or thereabouts of many studies. So what kinds of damage are we seeing? Well, this is a certificate from the World Health Organization via IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, saying that radio frequency fields that we use commonly in communication devices are possible human carcinogens. That was back in 2011. And the lower frequency household electricity that I mentioned, that was already a group 2B carcinogen. So, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg, the way I see it, because I've looked at many papers now, and there's disruption to both structure and function at a cellular level, which leads on, please don't try and read all the information on these slides, they just give you a quick snapshot of the background. But on a systems level, when you put those cells together to form your neurological system or your reproductive system or your cardiac cycle, then we are seeing that whole systems are affected, and that of course has knock-on effects. So some illness processes that are well defined have also been linked with EMF exposure in the literature. Now you'll see the last one on this slide is electromagnetic hypersensitivity. That happens to be a subject of interest for me. And it's a fairly new term to describe a constellation of symptoms that people are feeling in response to electromagnetic field provocation. And the constellation is very broad-ranging, as we would expect from a radiation-induced issue. All systems are affected, but it's commonly symptoms like insomnia, headaches, dizziness, tinnitus, cardiac dysrhythmias, sensory upregulation, so people can claim they have a very strong sense of smell and things are smelling very offensive to them, or the same with their taste, or their temperature sense becomes extremely sensitive. And what I find particularly interesting about this is that figures in the literature have suggested that maybe 3%, sometimes up to 10%, but thereabouts of the population may be affected by this. However, if you look at literature, and this is peer-reviewed and published, and ask people about these symptoms, and then look at how close they live to cell phone towers, for example, what you'll find is there is a dose-response effect of these symptoms depending on how close you live to that tower. You can do other types of studies, like look at how intensely people use their mobile phones. And mobile phone usage is also correlated with many of these symptoms in a dose-response fashion in the general population. So that's not just people who've held up their hand and said, I think my Wi-Fi router is giving me a headache. This is people that have no idea themselves of that connection. So this could be affecting a really large number of people, and many of those symptoms are escalating in general practice and within the different specialties. So, and this is the important part of my talk and the bit that I'm looking forward to. What can we do about it? On a practical level, I loosely divide this into two groups. I think from a preventative point of view, and I think that's most important, we want to stop something happening if we can. We have to look at avoidance and stopping ourselves having that level of radiation. But on a secondary level, there are some things that we can't change or we can't do anything about, and we then have to manage those and optimise our health to deal with them. So first and foremost, in terms of reducing exposure, these are some of the devices I mentioned, but all electromagnetic fields affect health in one way or another. So think about all of the different fields that your life might encounter. And I talked about this mnemonic. So emergency physicians like mnemonics because it keeps everything simple in times of stress and gives you a framework to look down and tick boxes and think, have I done everything I can do? So I hope this might help give you some structure to your thoughts. And we'll start with A, and we're going to actually spend most of our time talking about A at the beginning here, because avoidance, I think, preventative, is sensible. Now, some general principles when you're thinking about trying to lower radiation in your environment. First of all, I personally think health comes first. I realise I'd say that as a medical doctor, but everything else in your life is harder if you're having to battle with your health. So people will often make excuses for the reason they can't take their health seriously, and they'll often put other people before their own health, and in the long term we all know that that's not sensible. So when people say, I can't afford to do that, and I don't just mean for financial reasons, but for many other reasons, think about that seriously. Is it that you can't afford to, or perhaps you can't afford not to? Have courage to change the things you can't accept. Some people find this whole area very overwhelming, because it's something that's for the older people especially, it's happened, they remember life before all of this, and it's quite a shock to look at the change that's happened just in half a lifetime. But I would say that you have control over a lot more than you may realise, and again I hope you'll realise that by the end of this lecture. Think outside of the box, and I mean this both in an abstract sense and in a very practical sense. So in the abstract sense, you've got to be creative. You've got to break out of dogma and social constraints if you really want to address this properly. And I think that's quite a healthy thing to do in many other ways as well. But also, from a practical point of view, you need to think outside of the box you're in, because electromagnetic radiation has no respect for walls in general. So you need to think about what's above and below you, what's to the sides, and what's in the buildings or areas nearby. So you can't avoid something until you know what it is. You need to know what it is and where it is. And for that, you need a meter. And very loosely, there are thousands of different meters on the market, and they all measure different things, and they come in very different price ranges, and that's beyond the scope of this lecture. But very loosely, I think, is a basic set of tools. Having a radio frequency meter that measures a fairly broad range of common frequencies in life these days, and having something that will look at your electrical fields, the low frequency that I talked about in your household wiring. Having both of those, I think, is a good idea. It gives you a good baseline set of information to go on. And The place I would like to concentrate talking about first is your bed space. Your bed space is your sanctuary. It's where your body does its healing and growing, restoring and resting. And you spend a lot of time there, or you should. So this is a place you should focus on as being your first environment to fix. Alarms are really big culprits. And I would say if you can avoid high EMF alarms, and this would be either ones that are plugged into your 50 Hz supply and therefore picking up that supply, or active phones, which are very common. Do not ever leave your phone switched on by your bed at night. You can still use it as an alarm clock, but put it in aeroplane mode. That disables all four. I think 4 is the current smartphone set of different radio facilities, but it will disable all of those. So the best alarm, in my opinion, is sunlight. However, we don't all have the luxury of synchronizing our sleep-wake cycle with dusk and dawn. That would be ideal, but if you don't have that luxury, think about mechanical alarm clocks. They can have quite a loud tick, but they have no EMF at all. LCD battery powered, these are quite small and portable and have a very small EMF field. LED colour temperature bulbs are an interesting, innovative solution because they try to emulate a daylight spectrum to wake you up, to tell your brain that it's dawn, whether it is or not. It's not the same as a daylight spectrum, but that may be a nicer type of alarm for you. A phone in aeroplane mode, as I mentioned, but all of these, apart from the mechanical, all of these do have small batteries in them. Now, your body and your brain are more sensitive than the meters that you will buy. So bear in mind that even if something doesn't come up on your meter, just a little set of batteries has an electromagnetic field that could, in theory, interfere with your biology. So keep batteries away from you. So, you know, just as far away as you feel is comfortable, but I still wouldn't advise that you keep them right next to your head in bed. Other things in your bed space. So you want to distance yourself from all forms of EMF in your bedroom. And you'll find that things like lamps, hair dryers, TV, they may pick up household electrical fields. So switch them off, or move your bed or move the device. Dimmer switches have quite a high electromagnetic field. Wall wiring, so think about where the wires are likely to go in your walls that might be right behind your bed. Floor lighting circuitry, I mentioned thinking outside your box. Think about the fact that if you're on the second floor, you may be right above the floor lighting circuit in the room below, and that can have a very high field. Fuse boxes and transformers could be right behind the wall, behind your head. Fridges, computers, routers, stereos, although they may not be in your room, they might be straight below you. So they're all things to think about, and there is another way of dealing with these that I think is easier and better for your health, and I'm going to come on to that in just a minute, rather than trying to move them all away. Also avoid conducting what electromagnetism is there right to where you're sleeping. So things like metal mattress springs or a metal bed frame. I recommend personally organic metal-free mattresses, things like latex or coconut matting or sheep's wool. Avoid metal jewellery, dental work, metal in your clothing or pyjamas. Dental work and prosthetics obviously might be unavoidable, but with mercury amalgams, we'll move on to that. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. High static artificial fabrics. We all know that phenomenon where you're wriggling around in bed and all of a sudden it looks like there's a lightning storm in your bedroom. So nice organic cottons and silks might be better for your bedwear and your bed linen. Take symptoms seriously. Another thing that we've evolved to do fairly recently is not to listen to our bodies when they're trying to tell us something. So if your sleep quality, if it's as simple as your sleep quality is poor, that's something you must take very seriously. And things like mood disturbance. There's a lot of things that we're starting to think of as normal that are not normal. Poor sleep is not normal. Having mood swings or depression or anxiety is not normal. Having palpitations that sometimes wake you up in the night or just generally feel uncomfortable, that is not normal. These are all signs that may be very subtle that your body might be telling you it's not happy. Now, this is a set of slightly more creative advice that I'll give you, which I personally think everyone should do. But if you have symptoms, I would say it's actually even more important. And this is particularly for people who have electromagnetic hypersensitivity. But when I said there's another solution, rather than trying to move everything away, turn your circuit breaker off at night. Some people think that sounds really dramatic, but trust me, it's not. Once you get into the pattern of doing it, like brushing your teeth, brush your teeth, shave your night, turn the circuit breaker off. Once it's built into your nighttime ritual or habit, you will find it's incredibly simple. The thing that freaks people out most about doing it is their fridge freezer. In England, sadly, it's not warm enough generally to worry about that. Most fridge freezers are fine overnight. But if you really are worried, you can consider getting a gas-powered fridge freezer or leave the ring main on just to your fridge if it's not too close to your bed space. During the daytime, to achieve really the same thing, you can either just manually put the circuit breakers on that you're using, or you can have demand switches fitted, which mean that only the circuits that you're actually using will be energized when you're using them. So brilliant for your, all of this advice is really good for your household utility bills and better for the environment. Phones really should only be for emergency only, in my opinion. Your cell phone should only be used for emergencies. Store it in flight mode and remove the battery if you can't put it in flight mode. Some of the older models you can't. Only use wired internet and ensure, if you're going to go to the trouble of wiring up your internet, ensure that both your computer and your router do have the radio frequency disabled, and I will tell you how to do that in just a moment. Consider non-EMF heating and cooking. Again, some people think this is too extreme, but if you have symptoms, this is a really good idea. So things like Argos, Ray-Burns or Esses, you can have a gravity oil-fed system or a solid fuel system, and that means no electromagnetic fields in your cooking space and or heating at all. Filtering your 50 Hertz supply in your walls. So all of the different appliances that you have plugged in when they're on and active will be putting harmonics or transients onto your wiring that are commonly known as dirty electricity. And some have associated that with a more negative health outcome also. And you can purify your electrical line by putting filters in. One thing I would suggest is that if you're going to use those filters, don't put them close to where you spend a lot of time, because the filter itself does have a small electromagnetic field. People who are very sensitive have noticed increased symptoms when they're near the filter. Filtering it at source might be a good solution to that. Consider shielding. Now, shielding is a bit of a dark art, so I will tell you a bit more about that. Know what you're shielding against, and this is where your meters will help you, because the frequency and the wavelength and the characteristics, the intensity, etc. will help you to know what kind of shielding material you need to use to be successful. Get experienced advice. This is a highly complex subject and very much prone to failure. Always use meters before and afterwards to ensure that you have achieved what you intended to achieve. Beware of reflection. Some shielding fabrics are reflective, and therefore you can actually reflect the fields that you wanted to try and avoid and create hotspots that were worse than before you started. Beware of high expenditure, and I say this for two reasons. Because firstly, as I said, failure is common, but also you can often find a much cheaper type of fabric that does the same job. It may not be as attractive or useful, but that's sometimes a good place to start to know that you can achieve it. Consider whether the fabric that you're using needs to be grounded or ungrounded, and an expert will help you decide that. Beware of shielding natural EMF. This isn't really a worry for most of the people I'm guessing in this audience. For people who are extremely sensitive, they may go to great lengths. And burying yourself underground or building a very high-tech Faraday cage, you may be at risk of shielding some of that green part on my earlier graph, the natural irradiation that was there before we were. That's very hard to shield, but doing those kinds of things, you may actually achieve that. And that cuts you off from something that is known to regulate your circadian rhythm. That would be bad for health. But in everyday terms, you're unlikely to achieve that. If you do have symptoms, noticing whether they get better when you've done it is helpful. And I say aim for natural shielding. Now, I'm a big fan of naturally shielding your building from the outside rather than trying to do fancy things inside, or trying to shield your body, which is particularly hazardous. Always try to shield the building or the device before you start trying to shield yourself. So in the top left there, that's limestone. Limestone is an excellent matching natural shielding material, but it can be a little bit expensive to build with. So in the middle there, that's mud, not expensive, but also natural, eco-friendly. And when you render it with a nice thick lime plaster, which is what you should really be doing, or a lime wash, that gives added shielding with that. Larch, the bottom left there, that's charred larch. Now timber is a nice building fabric, but it isn't brilliant at shielding electromagnetic fields. The shielding paints that some of you might be aware of, many of those are carbon-based, because carbon is very conductive and it can therefore be used for shielding. But rather than using expensive paints that sometimes have quite a high chemical residue, you can think about doing this, charring the outside of your timber. If you produce a nice, good, heavy carbon, that in theory might be shielding. This was a suggestion from a colleague of mine, Isaac Jameson, architect and building biologist. And then in the bottom right there is concrete. Again, not one of my favourites because of the chemical residue, but on the cheaper side and can be excellent for both grounding and shielding. And in the top right, that's straw. Now, straw may not jump into your mind as being brilliant at shielding, but straw, when you use it for building, it's cheap, it's eco-friendly, and has brilliant thermal or U values for building, obviously. And when you use a nice, thick, heavy lime plaster render and lime wash, it can be a very good shielding. So that was a bit about your bedroom and your home spaces. Workspaces can be the worst areas, and also you often spend a very large proportion of your day. So using the same principles, you want to distance yourself from emissions and either remove or swap devices, avoid conductive conduits and things like your desk and chair or the floor underneath you. Now, lighting is really important. In the bed space that I talked about before, you should have no artificial light at all. That is very, very important. Artificial light, even a tiny amount, the human eye as a sense organ is incredible because you can see in a perfectly dark room one single photon. That's how sensitive it is. And that's why I say things like with your alarm clocks, your electromagnetic senses may be similarly sensitive, so even very small fields can have profound effects. But so artificial light at night time switches off your melatonin production, which is destructive to health over a long period of time and gives you poor sleep quality. But in the daytime, what you want is as much natural UV light from a natural spectrum as you can get. You want to avoid fluorescent bulbs. They're very unnatural spectrum. Incandescents are one of my preferred choices. With the innovation of more eco-friendly technology, we're looking more at halogens now. Some types of LEDs, and I say some because there's a huge variation in their spectrum output, so some are better than others. And consider colour temperature. The reason I say this is because fluorescents, for example, often have a very strong blue-white component. And if you look outside in the middle of the day, you'll see that bright blue sky. Those blue frequencies tell your brain that it is the middle of the day, that you should be on top performance, that you should be high energy in terms of your brain waves. And they kind of exploited this back in the 70s by bringing this into a lot of fluorescent lighting because they noticed it made the productivity of their workers higher. And it did for a short period of time, but the problem is you burn people out if you keep their brain functioning that way for a prolonged period when it's not supposed to be. So what you should be trying to do even in your office environment is only have that quality of light in the middle of the day and make sure you have the warmer tones in the morning and in the evening to help get your brain programmed for good sleep quality. So using computers and tablets, I would say use flight mode, disable your Wi-Fi in the control panel, and I will show you how to do that because even for techie folk among us, I have seen them fail to do this and be very happy with their new hard wiring, and then I come along and find that it's all still emitting RF. Use Ethernet cables as a replacement for your internet. Disable your router radio frequency emission, which again is a common thing that people forget to do. Ensure that your system is grounded, both the casing and the system itself. Some computers are well grounded in their power supplies, but some are not. This may be something you need professional advice with. Consider screen colour changing software. There's some freeware on the internet called Flux, and I think probably many other packages. And once you download that, it's very quick and easy. It changes the colour temperature of your screen in the morning and the evening to do exactly what I was talking about. Give you those long wavelengths so they're more conducive to good sleep. Limit your screen time, even if you do all these other things. It's not healthy to sit in front of a screen all day, and particularly not late in the evening. Don't disregard the role of household frequency. So even once you've corrected the radio frequency, the communications, have a look with your electrical meter at the electrical emissions and make sure they're optimised as well. You can do that with grounding the system and possibly shielding. So I told you that I would mention how to disable the Wi-Fi. Forgive me, those of you who are all over this, but I'll be very quick. So you need to go, there's a little button on the front of your computer that says Wi-Fi off. You would think that would turn the Wi-Fi off. It does not turn the Wi-Fi off. It stops you being able to use the radiation that's irradiating your body, but it doesn't stop it coming out. So by all means switch that off, but do this as well. Go into your control panel. You will need Device Manager. Once you're in Device Manager, you'll have this box on the left appear, and you need to go down to Network Adapters. Under Network Adapters, you find your wireless card, it's often the top one, and then you'll get another window when you click on it, and you click Disable. Disable, close, and that will disable the RF emissions from your computer. So, for safer router use, ideally, I would say buy a router that does not have wireless capacity. And the reason I say this is because people who've tried to disable the RF emissions from their router have had immense trouble with it. You can ask me about that at the end if you're interested. But if you do have something like a BT Home Hub, for example, you can put this number into your browser. Forget the www, just this number. And then you'll come up with a home page. You want to choose Settings. It will ask you for a username and password, which may be on the back of your router. And then you want to go Advanced Settings, Wireless, select Wireless Network Enable No, and then press Apply. That will disable the RF from your router. And that's what the screen looks like that you'll come to. So, as an alternative backup, and some people have needed this, your network service provider can turn your router back on remotely, and this has happened in many cases. So this is a way, as a sort of fail-safe, to make sure it doesn't accidentally come back on when you're not intending it to. You can go into the same homepage, choose Settings and BT Power Save Mode, and select Mode Enable Yes, and then you can choose the times that you want your Wi-Fi on or off. This is also really useful for people that feel they can't disable their Wi-Fi permanently. So if you have to use your Wi-Fi but you only want it on for a certain period of the day and you want to always be sure it's off at night, you can do this and we'll make sure that it always switches off at night. So that's the screen you'll get new, so you can put the times in there that the RF will be enabled. Safer phone use. So my opinion is phones should be for emergencies only. And you should therefore store them in flight mode and switched off. Never carry them on your body when they're active. And even your telecommunications companies will say this in their manuals. So if you read the manuals, they'll say things like, never have this device less than, say, 15 millimeters from your body. It ranges depending on the manual, but that is because when you go closer than that distance, you're actually at risk of exceeding those thermal guidelines that I talked to you about. They don't take into account all the non-thermal ones that are also a concern. But, so my advice is never carry it on your body. But if you have to make a call using one, use speakerphone and keep the phone as far away from your body as you can when you do that. Don't touch it. Beware of headsets. If you can't use speakerphone because of either privacy or background noise, if you need to use a headset, I would say beware of wired ones because that can conduct the RF into your ear. And Bluetooth headsets are emitting a different type of radio frequency field directly next to your brain. So it's a lower intensity field than the phone, but this is very important. We now see a lot of research that shows that low intensity fields can in some cases be more biologically active than the higher intensity fields. So I'll mention this again at the very end, but this is one of the reasons that when people say it doesn't matter because it's far away, I say, you know, that's not necessarily true. We don't know where those biological windows are. This is a science that we're still exploring. But, so I would say if you have to use a headset, use an air tube headset. It means that there's nothing to conduct the radiation directly to your brain. And keep the phone as far away from your body when you're doing that as you can. Landlines. Many people forget that cordless landlines are emitting the same kind of radio frequency, but in some instances you could argue that they're worse because some types, in fact most of them, emit 24 hours a day whether you're using them or not. So I don't advocate that type of phone. I would say it's a conference calling speakerphone. They have good quality microphones and speakers that mean that you can multitask and be away from the phone while you're having the call and with nothing next to your brain. If again for background noise or privacy you need a handset, then use a corded handset, an old-fashioned corded handset. It will have the extra low frequency coming in though, near your brain. If you have to have a cordless phone, then you can get low radiation eco model DECT phones. So there are a few on the market. They use adaptive power control to lower the amount of radiation coming out when you're using them, and when you're not using them, they stop altogether. Better the environment, better for your brain. This is beyond the scope really of today's lecture, but this is my last slide on avoidance, and really all it is to mention when we're avoiding, yes, let's avoid toxic electromagnetic fields, but there are many things that can act synergistically with those fields to undermine health at the same time and lower our resilience. And that means toxic chemicals and other things. But again, feel free to ask me questions about that at the end. So now, that was the bit on A. That was just A. We're now going to go as quickly as we can through B2Hs. The B2Hs are about optimizing the rest of your life for resilience, optimizing your health specifically to deal with EMF. So B is for breathing fresh air. And I put this on because modern AC systems and heating systems can generate a lot of positively charged ions. Positively charged ions can induce electromagnetic hypersensitivity. And to counterbalance that, mainly in most places, what you need to do is open the window, get some fresh air. Negative ion-rich air is generated in natural environments by water droplet formation. So improve your health in that way. Creative cognitive care, and again, you're an audience that will understand this better than many, but epigenetics is teaching us that it's not just our environment that is important, it's our perception of our environment. So you can put somebody into two rooms that are identical in every way, but tell them that one of them is hostile. And their genetics will change in protection or defense of that perceived hostile environment. So electromagnetic fields trigger an upregulation of our fight and flight nervous system. That's our anxiety system that tells us we have to run from something. You may not consciously be aware of that, but that's what happens, especially over prolonged exposure. And staying in a fight and flight part of your nervous system stops you being in the parasympathetic rest, digest, heal, grow system. That helps build, for example, your immune system. So one of the things that you can do, if you're unfortunately stuck in a high EMF environment and it's pushing your sympathetic nervous system, is force your nervous system back into believing that you are in a relaxed, happy, positive environment, whether you are or not. And some of us are very good at achieving that, some of us aren't, but it really is a very important thing to do. And all of these things will help achieve that, and I'll highlight reconnecting with nature. There is some very inexplicable positive health effects of doing that. And there are so many different things that we won't go into all now, but it combines many of the things I'm talking about in terms of negative ions, natural UV light, earthing and grounding, etc. And this will, even if you're in a bad environment, will somewhat soothe your nervous system into being able to still build your immune system. So dental care, D is for dental care, and I mentioned this particularly with regards to mercury amalgams. So mercury is a toxic metal. We should never have put it in our mouths, but we made that mistake. And if you have it in your mouth, you may want to think about having it extracted, particularly if you do use a cell phone. It will behave somewhat as a conductor close to your brain. Mercury amalgams release mercury vapour, I think, almost continuously. So, and that can sit in your neurological system and damage it. Having said that, when they're removed, you also release quite a lot of mercury. So if you're going to do that, you need to go to a very mercury-aware dentist who uses good procedures like vacuum extraction, possibly rubber dams, etc., to minimise mercury toxicity during the procedure, and find out a bit about the replacement substance, because that may not be great either. Exercise. We all know exercise is healthy and good, but you can combine it with some of the other things that I'm going to talk about to, again, build resilience in many different forums. So inducing sweat helps you release toxins that may, especially metallic toxins, may be enhancing your conductivity, but also may be acting synergistically with EMF to damage your health. Do it in a low EMF environment. Many gyms are not. Fresh air, UV light is good, and if you can in the morning, rather than upsetting your sleep with doing it later in the evening. F is for food, and it makes me really happy that the most commonly shared images on social media now are of food. We're finding we're reconnecting with our primitive selves, and good food, rich in antioxidants, is colourful, it's attractive. There's very few fatty diets, no matter how fatty, that disagree with the fact that fresh fruit and vegetables is a healthy thing, and it definitely is if you're trying to beat the health effects of electromagnetic fields which induce oxidative stress. So we can counterbalance that by having a lot of good antioxidants. Grounding. So electronic engineers all understand that electrical systems need to be well grounded in order to function correctly, and we are no different as human beings. The surface of the Earth is negatively charged. I mentioned the positive charge that we can pick up through modern day systems Connecting with that negative charge allows us to neutralise the positive charge, and we can do that through the solar barefoot on something like wet grass or a beach, but actually even in the urban jungle on a good piece of concrete that's attached to the earth, that will allow you to ground. Bathing is brilliant also, and consider this: if your computer system is not grounded, but you are grounded, then your computer system will ground through you. So that's why I mentioned in the beginning, make sure your computer system is well grounded as well. And there are commercially available grounding products to do things like ground you in your bed at night while you're sleeping. The concept, I think, is a healthy one, but be a little bit careful, because some of the products available, for example, grounding mats that are plugged into wall wiring, that is dependent on the integrity of your wall wiring. And in some cases, that can pick up an electrical field into your bed space. So just be careful of the product you're choosing and measure before and afterwards to make sure it's doing what you think it's supposed to be doing. Hydration. It's always important to maintain a good level of hydration. Don't overhydrate. That will give you hyponatremia, low sodium, which can also give you some of the health effects. And don't underhydrate. And I would just mention that water, good, healthy, pure water is becoming harder and harder to come by. I don't have a big problem with tap water, but just be aware that there are chlorines and other chemicals now in it that some may be very sensitive to. I don't advocate plastic bottled water because of leaching of toxins from plastics, so glass bottled spring water may be a good option, especially for the more sensitive amongst you. Sleep. Now, sleep is only toward the end of this set because it begins with an S. It really, for me, would be number 2 after avoidance. So prevent the exposure, but sleep can really catch you out, because sleep is essential. We die of lack of sleep in a relatively short space of time if we don't get it. That's kind of all you need to know. It messes with your neurological system if you're deprived. And electromagnetic fields alter your brainwaves. They alter your EEG, which can alter your sleep quality. And as I mentioned, they push your fight and flight nervous system. So that has an effect on your sleep quality. But also, sleep deprivation leads to a more sensitive neurological system that is more sensitive to electromagnetic fields. So you can get stuck in this positive feedback loop of a very destructive cycle. If you are not achieving good sleep quality, you must break that cycle. Now, I taught you about ways to lower the EMF in your sleeping space, but these are just some other points and hinters to make sure that you have good sleep quality. So don't eat a big meal last thing before bed. Avoid bright light, and particularly that blue-white light. Make sure the lighting in your home that you use in the evening is as natural as possible and of the longer wavelengths. Don't ingest stimulants like coffee and things like that late at night. Optimise temperature, noise, no artificial light in your bed space, really important. You may want to ground yourself deliberately before bed with a nice hot shower or bath or going outside. These are all things that will help, and melatonin is really essential. When you don't sleep, you don't produce melatonin. It's your body's most powerful endogenous, inside the body antioxidant. So like those colourful foods, it helps you fight aging and fight cancer, and you need good sleep to produce it. You also need correct sunshine. Correct sunshine will allow you to regulate your circadian rhythm and optimise your melatonin. And so you need to get some proper, unadulterated, natural UV light, especially in the mornings. We've all become a little bit, or some have become a bit phobic, and they're wearing sunglasses constantly and covering themselves in sun cream and clothes and hats and etc. There's a worry about malignant melanoma, and it's a really real concern. There is a growing number of young people dying of this. But there are 2 things I would like to make clear. One is that you don't need to excessively expose yourself to UV to get a good, healthy amount of vitamin D. 10 to 15 minutes a day, longer in the winter, longer on a cloudy day. But that's all you need every day to get a reasonably good vitamin D. But secondly, more and more dermatological research is now showing us that UV light may not be the only cause of malignant melanoma. We're seeing a big rise in skin cancers that are in areas of the skin that are not generally exposed to UV light. Now, I would suggest that it is possible, given that this type of radiation is a group 2P carcinogen, that actually the rise that we're seeing may be RF radiation or synergistic action between RF radiation and UV light or other substances in our environment. So please do get a healthy amount of UV, not too much, you don't want to burn or over-tan, but allow your body to make vitamin D, and this will also help with your healthy melatonin production, your circadian rhythm. So, we've gone through the A to H's, and there's more that I could tell you, but we had to cram it in for today. Feel free to ask me questions about any part of that at the end. But to recap and round up on what I've been going through, I've kind of talked to you about different ways of lowering your exposure, or lowering your radiation doses, and it is very hard in modern life to obliterate it entirely. But because of this phenomenon where low intensity doesn't necessarily fix the problem, I would say ideally do aim for the purest solution that you can. So use aeroplane mode, turn it off rather than moving it away from you. And use hardwiring, fibre optics, etc. Really techie people prefer that anyway, because it gives you a better quality of connection, better longevity, better security. So they really are excellent systems. And don't forget to think about the electrical component from your household wiring, as well as the pulsed RF seems to be the radiation that people are developing a lot of symptoms to. But household wiring should not be neglected. It isn't the first time we've made some mistakes in terms of neglecting the biological effects of our environment, but we are in a stronger position than ever before to have learned from our previous mistakes, to move forward in a sensible way, to try to address this in a more timely manner and protect especially the most vulnerable amongst us. So in summary, we're electromagnetic. Life is electromagnetic, that's how we work. And non-thermal levels of radiofrequency radiation can cause damage even at low intensities, as can household electrical fields. And present safety standards are not, in my opinion, protective. Individuals can lower their personal exposure by doing things that I've talked about, like using airplane mode and hardwiring. And you can optimise your general health in many other ways to improve your resilience. But I still have a very large number of people coming to me and saying that they've done all this and they're really distressed because they are having negative health effects from their neighbour's Wi-Fi or the cell tower that's outside their bedroom window. And I have huge sympathy and empathy for people in that position, but we are very fortunate. We live in a democracy. We just had our general election, and if you are in that position, I would say please do speak out. Don't feel overpowered. Go to your local MP, talk about your concerns. There are websites, and I can give you addresses for those, and I can give you information myself, which will help you to make your point with peer-reviewed published literature. And that is the only way we will move forward. It's by educating ourselves and then politically making some changes. So one of the things that I've done to try and move this subject forward with a bit more efficiency is set up at the core of it, it's medical doctors. I've called the group FIRE, Physicians' Health Initiative for Radiation and Environment. And we want to achieve these mission statements, but it's not just for medical doctors. We were very happy to embrace anyone who would like to support the group, and in particular electronics engineers, building biologists, legal workers, administrators, to just help us actually coordinate and have a meeting. If you'd like to be part of this group or feel that you have something that would be useful to us to support us, please do let me know. And I can be contacted at the Radiation Research Trust via this email address, which is for Eileen O'Connor, and I'd be very happy if you guys are interested and would like to support us.